Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hub Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Hubbard, and our guest today is Angela Smith. Angela works at Origin Ventures, an early stage venture capital firm investing in software and marketplace businesses in the digital native economy. Angela also graduated from the BYU MBA program in 2021. In this episode, we discuss the state of VC, how Angela got into VC, and her thoughts of being a woman in a traditionally male-dominated industry. Let's get started. All right, Angela, thanks for coming on the Hub. Excited to have you.
Excited to be here.
I'm sure, I don't know in the VC world if you're on a lot of podcasts or if you do a lot of media or interviews or anything like that. My impression of VCs is they like to kind of fly under the radar a little bit in terms of the public eye. So uh, I'm grateful that you are stepping out into the. I mean, I'm not really famous, so this podcast doesn't have a huge reach, but still public. So appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think there are some VCs that love the public eye and they're all over Twitter, things like that. I'm not that way, so this is my first podcast. So, what an honor.
Well, hopefully you enjoy it. Hopefully it's a positive experience for you. With that being said, I think listeners and myself, I am curious to hear how you ended up in VC. Uh, we were You were in the MBA program with me, the grade after me, but we had some interaction through the Adam Smith Society and some other clubs. But from my understanding, you were a school teacher before in the Bay Area. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Um,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I think before we jump into that, I think it might be useful just to talk a little bit about what venture is. I think most people know, but I actually didn't even know what venture capital was when I started business school. It was something I'd heard about, but if you asked me how to explain it, I couldn't tell you what it was. Just so for your listeners that may not know, um, it's pretty simple. Essentially, what we do is we're money managers, we're investment professionals, and we take money from really rich people or rich institutions, and we create what's called a fund. And then we can take that money and invest in startups. And the point is for us to make money for the people who've given it to us. But the really unique way that we're doing it is by funding and growing startups. And we work really closely with those startups to help them be successful. Um, so it's a pretty fun job. Um, but going back to your original question of how did I end up in it, it's I have a very, very non-traditional path. Most venture capitalists, they start out in either banking, they're investment bankers, or they are consultants, or they've founded and run their own companies. And then eventually they land in venture capital later when they have a lot of really great experience to share with the founders they're investing in. For me, I was a teacher. So I taught for 6 years, taught 3 years of high school social studies in Houston, Texas, and 3 years of middle school social studies in the Bay Area, primarily world history. So I love history. I love the world. I love all of that. And that was my passion in my 20s. That was like what I'd always wanted to do was be a teacher and work with students and things like that. And I ended up working in very low income communities. Um, that's just, it wasn't like necessarily my intention to do that as a teacher, but that's just where I ended up. And I loved it. I loved the communities I was in. I loved it was very different from where I had grown up in Southern Utah. But one thing I realized is that there was my students, we could get them into college, right? But in college they weren't necessarily super successful. A lot of them were dropping out and then they were just ended up having debt and then they stayed in this cycle of poverty. So I thought a lot about how do we in our education system, how do we prepare them to be successful in college, through college and beyond. And a lot of that came down to financial literacy. Um, so we don't really teach financial literacy in our school system right now. And so that became really important to me to develop a financial literacy curriculum. I talked to my principal, she signed off. She's like, yes, our students need this. So I started trying to create a financial literacy program at my middle school in California. But the problem was I didn't have financial literacy. Like I hadn't been taught it. I had grown up in an environment where kind of the expectation was, oh, you'll grow up, you'll get married, and your husband will take care of the finances. So like, I mean, my parents had taught me to save and things like that, but like I couldn't explain investing to you. I couldn't explain like what indexes were, like none of that. So here I am, this teacher, realizing I have my own lack of financial literacy. I need to learn this to teach my students so that we can all together kind of break this cycle of poverty. And I started reading a lot of books. I started talking to a lot of people. And it really became this passion of mine. Why hadn't I ever been like taught this growing up? Why hadn't I ever learned this? And the more I talked to just my friends, I noticed there was like also a big difference between the men and the women. Like when I talked to men, they could go off about their investment strategy and what they were doing. So it like their eyes would light up when I'd ask them like what their financial plan. And then when I'd ask my female friends, there'd just kind of be like this pause, like, oh yeah, I have a 401k, but like I need to figure out how to be what to do with that and things like and so I was like, this is so interesting. Like these women are at like they're working at Apple, they're working at Google, they're working at Facebook. They're like well-educated women, but there's
Yeah.
still just this disconnect. Um, and so anyway, all of this ended up with me being like, look, I can't learn enough from books. I can't learn enough from conversations. And I made the decision to leave teaching and go to business school. And my emphasis in business school was finance. I was one of the only females in the finance program at UIU. And anyway, this is a very long story for how I ended up in venture, but that was kind of the catalyst to get me into business school. Went back to BYU, which was my alma mater. And I didn't know this, but BYU has a really strong venture capital program. They have a student run venture fund called Cougar Capital that you can invest alongside a whole bunch of funds in Utah, as well as even a few in the Bay Area. And I got involved with that pretty early on, had several friends who were in that program. And I'm like, oh, this is so cool. And I had kind of entered business school very open minded, not really sure what I wanted to do, just knowing that, hey, I want to learn more about finance. And I think we need more women in the financial industry making decisions that impact everyone. Because I think the financial industry has been extremely homogenous for most of history. It's changing. But I just like, I want a seat at the table. Like, that's what I knew. And so anyway, got involved with Cougar Capital, and I'm like, this is so cool. This is an industry that desperately needs women. But I'm like, who's gonna hire a teacher? Like that's ridiculous. Like I don't have the
It's
background.
a it's very non-traditional background.
Yes. But my first year I interviewed for Pelion Venture Partners, which is the largest early stage fund in Utah. And I was like, there's no way they're going to hire me. Like my classmates, my peers, they're incredible. But they gave me an interview, which I was very shocked with. And I just kind of explained to them, hey, here's what I was doing. Here's what I want to do. I don't really have the background for this, but I feel like we need more diversity. We need diverse perspectives in this industry. And the managing partner, Blake Moderzitsky, loved it. He like loved me. And he's like, it's an internship. So it's very low stakes. And he's like, yeah, we'll bring you on. We'll teach you kind of the basics and what you need to know. So I interned with Pelion that first summer, which was an incredible experience. I loved it. It was the height of the pandemic, so all the partners were in the office, weren't traveling like they usually are. So I got a lot of FaceTime with the partners, and I think they all really enjoyed, kind of training me and teaching me and mentoring me. So it was just a really supportive environment. They they weren't hiring, so I didn't end up working with them, which I'd known taking that internship. But I kind of really hustled my second year, did Cougar Capital. I did a free internship with the Sorensen Impact Center, which was impact investing. And
Hmm.
I just talked to everyone. Hey, who do you know? Who's hiring? Who would want to hire someone with my background? Which is how I got connected with Origin Ventures. One of the managing partners lives in Park City here in Utah. And he met me. He heard my story. He saw that I was really well connected with all the Utah funds because of my experience with Pelion and Cougar Capital. And Origin, which is a nationwide fund, originally based in Chicago, but now we're nationwide. They loved my outside perspective. They loved that I didn't have this traditional background, and they wanted a unique perspective. So I think most venture capital firms, um, they talk about diversity, but they don't really put their money where their mouth is. I was really lucky to find Origin who valued what I had to bring, and were willing to take a chance on me. So I ended up with them, and I've been with them for a little over a year now. Anyway, that was very long-winded. So
No, that was great. That was very, very concise, easy to follow. So appreciate you kind of walking us through that. I have two, one story and another kind of question going back a little bit. One, the story with when you emphasize or you want to do the emphasis in finance at BYU. I don't know if you remember, but we had the finance retreat my second year, your first year, and it was kind of funny. It was all these dudes and you at this finance retreat, and
I think,
I don't know if you remember that, yeah, but
no, I was
all,
super intimidated. I'm like, what did I just get myself into?
it was. I think I think your family came to, extract you from the situation. You were like, "Get me out of here." No, it
Uh,
was funny. I just remember everyone was watching the BYU football game, and you were kind of just like off in the corner watching. I forget you were watching something else, but it was probably is a good highlight to show. Same with VC. It's pretty male dominated, and so it was good
yeah,
training for being in a
I
situation.
remember I took a video, like like an Insta story. Like I like panned the room, and it was all guys, and I'm like, I feel like I'm the Bachelorette, except they're all married and no one wants to talk to me. That was like the feeling I had at that retreat. But anyway, they all like that was just like my first time meeting everyone. It was a little overwhelming, but everyone ended up being super great. Everyone in the finance program wanted to help me. So,
Yeah,
um,
it is interesting. Just one more comment about the MBA program at BYU. I've talked to other friends who've gone to other top tier Wharton, Harvard, and BYU is a little special in that yes, it is competing, it is pretty competitive, but there's also a pretty strong friend aspect that I don't know is
very
replicated.
supportive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very supportive. The other thing I wanted to ask was why do you think there is this disconnect between men, generally speaking, men are more interested or have this financial literacy background, and women maybe not as much.
Yeah. And these are huge generalizations, so it doesn't apply to
Totally.
everyone, right? But I do think just in general, um,
Do you think it's more culture, or do you think it's more education, or do you think it's more just preferences, like on a large scale?
I think it's just more our culture. I mean, like I said, our education system doesn't really teach finance. And because of that, it happens very ad hoc. And I think in general, uh, conversations are directed more towards men about, hey, you need to understand finances, you need to know finances, you're going to be the provider, you're going to have a career. And like I said, these are huge generalizations, but with women, I was raised in a very small town, at St. George, Utah, where our finances was very conservative. And yeah, I was just expected like you're going to grow up, you're going to get married, and you'll have a husband to take care of you. And a career was always optional for me.
Right,
If you
right.
want to do that, you can, but like you don't have to. So I grew up not really stressed, not really concerned. Like, yeah, I'll just marry rich, and how
So,
great will that be, right? Which I know that's not everyone's experience, but we don't talk to women as much about needing to know finances, needing to be prepared.
Right.
And women in general have different preferences. Like, look at the stats, like, women are much better at saving than men, but we
Yes.
aren't better at investing. Like, we don't do it as much. So it's a lot of cultural things that are changing, but it's happening slowly.
What do you think, given your outside perspective of being a non-traditional background, plus being a woman in kind of a male-dominated industry, what insight or what perspective have you brought to Origin this past year?
Yeah, I'm not gonna like say, hey, I came into venture capital and I changed everything,
You've
right? Like,
dominated.
I'm yeah, I'm still the
30 under
lowest on the
30 under
totem
30, right? No.
I wish I was under 30, but um I'm still the lowest on the totem pole. I still have to work within the constraints of the system. Like, ultimately, decision making power lies with my partners. But it's really nice to come in, and my organization, at least, is very flat. Like, there's 8 full-time professionals on our team, and we all like get to have a voice. We all get to share our opinions. We all are part of the discussion. And so for me, when I'm part of the discussion, I am just acutely aware that, hey, like, I get to represent like my gender, but also the fact that I've taught in low income communities, I just have a different perspective from
Hmm.
some of my partners who haven't interacted with that demographic as much. And so when we're talking about companies, when we're talking about potential, when we're talking about trends, um, I can bring in that perspective to the conversation, which I like is valuable, right? Like, that's a
Right.
huge, a lot of the companies we invest in are B2B, they're business to business, but I just understand a different group that has buying power in the United States that historically has not been considered or not been deemed necessarily even like valuable. And one thing, sorry, I'm kind of rambling, but one thing I feel really
It's all
passionate
good.
about is talking to more female entrepreneurs. And that's one thing, every VC I talk to, I'm like, hey, do you know any female founders? And um, so it's just been really great to like feel like I'm bringing in more female founders. We're having more conversations. But yeah, I mean, it's still like, we're not gonna make an investment because someone's a female founder. We're not gonna make an investment because someone is a minority founder. We're gonna make the best investments, because that's our responsibility to the people who have given us stewardship over their money.
Right.
But having that be a focus, having that be more part of the conversation, is important.
You might find, if I could put it another way, if that's okay, you might
Yeah.
find different founders. You might find different markets that maybe traditionally would have been overlooked or uh, just
Yeah,
not brought to the table.
it just wouldn't have come into our pipeline if I
Right.
hadn't been out going on.
Right. Can I ask? Oh, I want to switch a little bit. Thanks for sharing that, but I want to switch a little bit to maybe a little bit more of the VC side of things,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how do you find companies to invest in? What does your pipeline? How do you how do you funnel? How do you build up your pipeline, and how do you find companies to look at?
Yeah. Um, the biggest way and the most effective way is just through our network. And that is a big reason that funding hasn't gone to as many females and minorities, is because
Hmm.
VC is very much a like word of mouth.
It's kind of like the finance retreat, right? There's all these guys, and they're like, wait, and they're all
Yeah.
married. No, like, let's not talk to the female. Let's just stay with our friends here.
I mean, and it's like, it's not intentional. It's just, you talk to who you
Just
know, you
happens,
trust who
right?
you know. And when I talk to other VCs and they send me a deal, I like have this level of like, oh, this deal has at least been screened. There's merit to it, right?
Right.
And so I'm not gonna lie, that's a huge way that it works in venture, is me networking and talking with other VCs or talking with other entrepreneurs, people in this community, and them sending me deals. That's probably the number one way that my deal flow comes. And those are the best deals that come. There are other things we do. we have a software that kind of like is screening all of the startups out there and like kind of measuring them for growth and things like that. And so
Hmm.
I have like what's called a screener of like all the seed, because we mainly invest Series A. We'll do some
Yeah,
seed at
that's good.
Origin, but we mainly do Series A. And so it's screening all the seed funds out there, all of their investments, and every week I'm looking through and being like, okay, here's some of the new investments, here's some of the high performers, and then trying to figure out a way to reach out to those entrepreneurs. So there's a data element to it as well. Um, and then another way that we are sourcing is just accelerators, like looking at, there are a lot of accelerators around the country that are helping startups get their feet underneath them, getting off the ground. And so like developing relationships with those accelerators. Um, and then just like cold inbounds, there are like, we have somewhere on our site where people can submit their startups, and those emails come to me. And so I'm screening 5 to 10 of those pitches a day. So lots of different ways that deal flow is coming. Um, but like I said, the best one really is through the network. And that's why it's so important to have a diverse network. So you're getting a look at diverse deals. Because if you don't, you're just going to see the same things over and over again.
Makes sense. And, maybe if you want to share, I've observed more, at least in my network, I've observed more females going into VC or working at startups and I know you've partnered with some of them, top of mind, Serene, but there's others to, I don't want to say host a workshop or host a forum for female founders, minority founders. Do you want to talk a little bit about that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do feel like about 5 years ago, uh, really during the height of Me Too, all of that whole movement, there was this reckoning in venture capital where I think it was like 98% of VCs were male. Like there was this tiny, tiny percentage of VCs that were actually women, and even less were partners.
Yeah.
And so a lot of venture firms realized, hey, we need women. We need women in this industry. Um, Maybe it was an optics thing, I don't know, but I did kind of enter this world at a time when the value of women was starting to be recognized. So I feel really lucky. A lot like venture capital is a timing industry. To get into it, it's just really about the right timing.
Funds have
And
to be raised, or yeah, there's a timing element. Yeah, well said.
mhm. And so being based here in Utah, it was really cool because I feel like all of the major funds here were just starting to hire women kind of at the associate level. And so every fund now, except for one, I won't call them out, but every fund now has a female VC, and we're all around similar stages of our career. We're all trying to figure this out, and it's been really great where we can lean on each other, we can rely on each other. Like even though we're at separate funds, and in VC you're kind of like frenemies. It's like you're friends, you're going to work on deals together, but you also are like competing for the best deal. It's like this
Right.
weird dynamic. But I just feel like so supported by the women VCs in my network. And it's not just here in Utah. Like I've been introduced to a lot of VCs outside of Utah that are females, and we all just want to help each other be successful in this industry. We all kind of know what we're up against. And it's been really cool to kind of even just, the 2 years I've really been out here doing this, seeing more funds get more women. We've got two female partners in the Utah ecosystem, like at partner level.
Mm.
And so I think it's really exciting. It's really fun. But I'm really passionate, like I said, about not just having more female VCs, but having more female entrepreneurs. Which in Utah there's some, and the ones we have are incredible, but there's not that many. And so I did host an event in June. And it was for female investors, female founders. But then we decided, I hosted alongside Pelion and Kickstart. So it was three of us. Um, we decided we wanted to open it up to like women in tech who maybe hadn't thought about being a founder before. Like,
Right.
because you don't see those examples around you, you just don't really think it's possible or it's just like not on your mind that, hey, I could do this too. So we opened it up just kind of like, hey, if you're a female in tech, come to this event, come network, come get some food. And we had a panel with 3 founders, and it ended up being incredible. I was like, oh, if we get 30 people, I'll feel great. And I think we had 80 plus. Like,
Yeah.
and the results of that, like my former roommate that I lived with, she's decided she wants to learn how to code. Like she doesn't want to be a founder, but she's like, hey, I think I need to code. And like that was an idea that came to her during that panel by networking with other women. And I've heard multiple stories of women who went to that. They're not necessarily deciding to be founders, but they're like, hey, that made me think about my career and my career trajectory and what I'm actually doing. And so it's just, I think it's so important that women are getting together, we're networking, we're having these conversations, and we're lifting each other and supporting each other. Because if you're just working in a room with men all the time, like, and like I said, I have nothing against men, but if you're not seeing what's kind of possible for you, um, you're not like you're not going to achieve that. You're not going to achieve your full potential. So
You're not gonna be inspired. A lot of times, inspiration comes from seeing other people
yeah, like
make
you.
progress or do something a little different. Yeah.
Exactly. So it was a great event. And it's not going to be a one-off. We're actually planning our next one for November. So we plan to do 2 or 3 of these every year.
Yeah. That was smart to make it a little wider so women in tech could come. That's because I feel like there are a decent amount of, well, maybe it's just the network I know. My wife works in tech, so maybe it's. I feel
No,
like there's a lot more women in tech, but
it is. And it's definitely
maybe not.
changing.
Yeah.
It's changing. It's great.
What would you say the biggest surprise has been since you've joined Origin?
Um, I joined Origin. Obviously, I'm like very values and principle driven. And so I think I joined Origin and VC very idealistic. Um, where I'm going to go in, I'm going to represent women, I'm represent
I'm gonna
minorities,
change
and,
the industry. Watch out.
and then get in. And like, yeah, there's just a lot of structural things in place, and it's just a really interesting industry where the people in power, like it's essentially like it's their opinion that matters,
Yeah.
ultimately when it comes down to it. But really, like, I was like, I want to do venture. I want to fund all these entrepreneurs. I want to make people's dreams come true. And like we do, there's an element of that. But 99% of the deals I look at, we say no to. And
Yeah.
like, I hate that. I absolutely, that's the worst part of my job is meeting with a founder. What they're working on is so cool. You love what they're doing, you love them, but it's just ultimately there's only so much capital in our fund. And our responsibility is to our
LPs.
LPs, the people who have given us their money. And I think a lot of times,
LPs are limited partners, just to
yeah,
clarify that.
thank you. Limited partners, that's who's given us their money to invest for them. And a lot of times people in the entrepreneur startup community, they think of VCs like, oh, you have all this money,
Money.
why can't you just share?
Yeah.
And it's like we can, but if we don't make good investments, we're out of a job. Like our LPs aren't going to give us their money the next time we go around. And so
Right.
there's just so much responsibility on us to make good decisions and provide the right returns. And we make mistakes all the time. We miss good companies all the time. Um, but I think that's been the most surprising thing is how much I have to say no, and how much I hate that. I
Yeah.
would like to thank everyone, but I can't.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. That was good sharing. It kind of reminded me of like the frustration a lot of people had during the financial crisis with banks. It's like, wait, banks are always just why are they getting bailed out? They have so much money. It's just a lack. I think it goes back to the lack of financial literacy as a whole. There's maybe not, until you really get into it, you realize, oh, okay, maybe there are some constraints. Maybe this does operate differently than I was expecting.
You have to figure out how to work within the system to enact change. And it's going to be a slow process, but
Well, thanks for sharing that. That was good. Is there any? Can you talk a little bit about the VC industry as a whole? There's, you know, inflation's a little bit higher. There's been concerns about whether we're in a recession or not. What impact has that had on Origin and the VC industry as a whole?
Yeah, it's interesting because I entered venture at a time when valuations were extremely high, the economy was doing incredibly well. There had been this influx of capital from the pandemic. Um, and so it was crazy. Like deals were getting done in 2 to 3 days. Like there was very little deal, not at Origin. At Origin, we were very disciplined. We've been around since 1999, which there's value to like we've
Mm,
been through
being through
a
the
couple,
.com.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was getting frustrated. I'm like, we've got to be competitive. We've got to like give these crazy valuations to like win these great deals. And my partners kept being like, oh, like that's not like a really smart decision. And I was so frustrated. And then this like this year happened, the next year, and everything kind of crashed. The markets went way down, especially with tech stocks. And
Yep.
even though we're private markets, that impacts us. Like what's happening in the public markets impacts our ability to price companies, our ability to fund them, what the multiples are that we get on a deal, things like that. And so I think there was a much bigger impact on later stage. So Series B and beyond, those valuations really came down because
Right.
the further along you go with funding, the closer you get to an exit, to IPO, to being a public company. And if the public companies aren't performing well, you're not going to see a return. And so those stages of funding really got hit hard. We do seed Series A, and honestly, not that much has changed. I think there was a slowdown. Everyone was trying to kind of figure out, okay, what is actually
Reassess.
happening in the market? Are things going to bounce back? Are we in for a long-term recession? And so I would say it was a slower spring and summer than it was the year before. But seed Series A, the valuations haven't changed dramatically. But there was a slowdown, and I feel like this fall things are really going to start to pick up as companies that like held off on raising
Mm.
are going to need to raise now. So yes, we were impacted. Yes, I think founders actually have to prove value. I think there's not going to be as much emphasis on growth, growth, growth at all costs. And there's going to be more emphasis on getting to profitability, making sure you have an actually valuable company and service that you're providing
Right.
that can be profitable, supported by the markets, right? That's more valuable than what's been happening the past 5 to 10 years, where it's just grow, we'll give you money, grow, and things will
Figure
work
out
out
figure out profitability later.
later. So I think that's what startups seem to be focused on. And to be honest, that's what they always should have been focused on. I don't necessarily see downturns as a negative thing. I think that's the market at work.
Right.
We both belong to the Adam Smith Society, so we love capitalism, right? And
So
that's the invisible hand, right? And so while it's frustrating, I think there were a lot of companies getting funded that didn't actually have product market fit, and it was the capital that was holding them up. And so it's the real companies that are providing value that are going to be successful now. And that's just good for the market, in my opinion.
yeah, downturn kind of cleans out the system a little bit.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hype and things, the basics get lost, and then all of a sudden you have the crash, and it's like, oh, okay, let's focus back on what really
What
matters.
actually mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Angela, thanks again for coming on and talking to us about VC, talking to us about your background. Kind of wrapping up here, is there any final thoughts you would want to share with the audience?
Yeah, I think my message is I was a teacher for a long time, and that was a wonderful career. Like way harder. It's way harder to be a teacher than what I'm doing now, honestly. Like,
Especially high school and middle school, right?
yeah. But there was kind of just like this thought that like, well, this is what I am. This is what I'll always be. And this experience of like leaving teaching, taking the risk, going to business school, ending up in venture, it's just kind of shown me you can reinvent yourself at any time. Like
Yeah.
I went to business school at 31. I thought I was a little bit old to be doing it, but it's like I have my 30s is a completely different decade. It's a completely different career. And
Right.
it's been really cool for me to see like, hey, if you want something, you can just do it. You
Go
can just
get it.
go and get it, you know? I
Yeah.
mean, it was a lot of hard work. Like I had to work my butt off. But I think like if you're not happy in your job, if you're not happy in your career, if you're not happy in your life, change it. I mean, it's scary, but you can do it. I think that's kind of my final message.
Well said. Extremely well said. Thanks again for coming on the hub. Appreciate you taking some time. Hopefully you didn't miss any exciting deals while we were discussing, but this was enlivening for me, and appreciate you coming on. And yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. Great to see
Yeah,
you again.
you as well. We'll see you.
Okay, sounds good.